What do you get when you combine Pep Guardiola's prime Barcelona Tiki-Taka style of play with a lower league team in SkyBet League One? You get a dominant tactic that is incredible defensively and good in attack. We have done the impossible in Football Manager 2024. We took a lower league team in SkyBet League One and implemented Pep Guardiola's style of play, and we dominated the league. If you're managing a lower league team or any team at all and you're looking to transform your team to play beautiful football like Pep Guardiola's Barcelona, this tactic will get you there. It will get you goals by controlling possession, dominating teams in the middle of the park, not allowing the opposition any time to even have a shot at goal. As you can see, we have the least shots against in the league, resulting in fewer goals conceded. In this video, we'll cover all the possible changes you can even make to the tactic so you can stay unpredictable and remain consistent throughout the season. I've done a bit of testing with this system, implementing Guardiola's style of play with a League One side, and I've seen all the ups and downs that are possible with this tactic, so I'm going to show you how to actually implement the tactic and the possible changes you can make to stay on top. These changes help me get better results because I noticed that as I played throughout the season, teams will be going on to sit deep and it was difficult to break them down. This tactic video is a fifth part of a 5-part series called the Exeter City Tactical Rebuild. You have access to all the other videos that led to this one, and you can see how the tactic was built from scratch, piece by piece. So let's get into the tactic. So going into the tactic, I've actually cleared my screen so you can see every role as they're supposed to be. This is the default version, or what I'm going to call the primary tactic. There are usually 3 slots in Football Manager, so I've used 2 of them to actually create the original tactic, and then there's a third version which is a kind of back 3 system that helps us in alternative scenarios. But for this version, I do have a sweeper keeper on defend duty. In other versions, I've tweaked the goalkeeper's role, but what I noticed that for us to retain possession and defense, having a sweeper keeper on defend duty was quite helpful. And in the centre-back pairing, I opted for a central defender and central defender pairing. At some point, I started with ball-playing defender on the right-hand side, but he was always loose in possession and kind of gave away the ball when the opposition was pressing high. He dwelled on the ball too much and then gave away possession. I opted for just 2 central defenders because the central defender has the ability to just help the team maintain possession and lay off simple passes to more creative players, which is in the lower leagues to me is what I was looking for, and that was helpful in us dominating possession so much and building out from the back. On the right hand side, I had a fullback on support duty. There are no instructions for him. I did go on to include take more risk whenever I had a player like Kyle Norton playing here, but that's because Kyle Norton is an experienced player and he has the ability to take more risks. But so if you have a fullback on support duty that has good passing and somewhat okay vision, you can actually ask him to play, take more risk for that role. On the left hand side, I had a complete wingback on support duty. No instructions attached for him either. This player is a lot more adventurous, and at some point I was using the complete wingback on attack duty, but then towards the end of the season, obviously you're going to try to be more conservative, and I noticed that having the complete wingback on support duty kind of helped us have a bit of balance in defense, even though we're dominating the field and playing our football in the opposition's domain or territory. In defensive midfield, I've had some headache with this one because of the halfback. I have spoken about the halfback extensively in previous versions and previous parts of this Exeter City rebuild, and I did go on to get my halfback eventually. I went on to sign somebody. I brought in Giando Fuchs, and looking at his player attributes right now, you can see that he has the attributes that I'm looking for. He has that marking and aggression, which is key for a halfback. I've noticed in Football Manager. He also has good work rate, so he's very good defensively. Normally, he's supposed to be a ball-winning midfielder, but he has the attributes to actually play as a halfback. So that's why I ended up bringing him in, and it helped us improve our tactical philosophy. If you have a ball winner, you can play them as a halfback. But a halfback ideally can also be a centre-back. So I'm going to show you somebody in Jack Fitzwater. This Fitzwater was the player that I used as a halfback before I went on to sign Fuchs. So Fitzwater also has the marking and aggression, and bravery, of course, is in there. Work rate is about 15. So he's quite good for this role, but he's ideally a centre-back, but I've used him as a half-back, so that kind of works out for us. In centre of midfield, I've opted for a deep line playmaker and a Metala on support. Now, I used to have the Metala on attack duty, but that kind of left us, open in midfield. You can still use the Metala on attack if you're trying to break teams down and they're being too defensive, but by default, I've settled for the Metala playing on support duty because it kind of helps us maintain a bit of shape and move the ball around, recycle possession among ourselves quite well. The deep line playmaker is on the left hand side. His instruction, dribble more, is only there because I have a roaming playmaker also playing on this role. That is an alternative you can actually use to the deep line playmaker on support. You can also have a roaming playmaker play in here, but normally the dribble more instruction is not very important like that. In attack, I have a winger on support duty. Now this winger can also be an inverted winger depending on the player that you have. I've noticed that in FM24 they're quite similar, because you can have a winger that is going to cut inside. The winger is not also locked to just going out wide. He can also cut inside if he wants. So the inverted winger and the winger role are, quite the same. I think the winger stays a lot wider, while the inverted winger can be, a lot closer to the center of midfield. So whichever one you have as your player, you can go on to use those roles. On the left hand side is an inside forward on support. The reason why it's an inside forward is because this guy has to actually help out the striker. We'll get to the striker in a minute. And also the inside forward is on support because he has to create some room for your complete wing back that is going to be overlapping and getting into that space up ahead. And the striker, I did dabble with a false nine towards the early parts of the season, but as much as he helped us create chances and retain possession, he didn't help us score a lot of goals. So my assistant manager recommended that I use an advanced forward or a pressing forward, and then I started with a pressing forward on attack. For some games I've used the pressing forward, but more often than not, I've kind of settled for the advanced forward in this role, and that is the role that I was sticking with. So let's look at how the team plays together and break down the team instructions. So starting from the mentality, ideally a positive mentality is what worked out for me in this system. But because we're using Exeter City and we're kind of mid-table, I've settled for a balanced mentality in some games, actually starting out some games with a balanced mentality. Or when I go on to score a few goals and I'm playing positive, getting towards the 35th minute or towards halftime, I go on to change the balance and start the second half on a balanced mentality and kind of control the game a lot more. So both positive and balance are the two mentalities that I've been using throughout this system. I've not really gone to defensive or anything. Maybe in the last minute I've used ultra defensive when we're already winning the game and you absolutely have to seal everything. You can go for ultra defensive, but more often than not positive and balanced. And then in possession wise, this was also tricky, so you really need to pay attention here. I started with a fairly wide attacking width, and this has also worked. So you have to be really dynamic in Football Manager, and these are one of the changes that you can go on to make. You could start with a fairly wide or a fairly narrow attacking width, and then you can go ahead and make it extremely wide depending on the team that you're playing against. Now if the team is very difficult to break down, they're playing in a low block, an extremely wide width might help, and then also shooting on site might also help. And what I've had before was walk the ball into the box, but then I realized that when teams are defending very deep, you can't really break them down. You can try walking the ball into the box with a much lower tempo, but we'll get to the tempo much soon. Walking or shooting on site also helped us break teams down. Funny enough, in our approach play, the team is also going to try to play out of defense. You can see I have low crosses selected, but I have to show you somebody. There is a striker in my team, Matt Smith. Matt Smith actually has acceleration 2 and pace 3. So sometimes I can't really play a low cross. He's a target forward that is 6'6". So whenever I have Matt Smith on the field, what I do is to play with a target forward on support duty. Once I have my target forward on support duty, the low crosses then disappear, and then I go for floated crosses. I could still have walk the ball into the box even though I have floated crosses, and I could also have hit early crosses in there. It still works the same way. It's in a way trying to help us get goals when the team is being difficult to break down. When I'm doing that, I don't really touch the passing directness. It is always on shorter. What I've done differently was to move it to much shorter passing. The tempo wasn't always on higher tempo. That kind of came much later when the teams were sitting really deep and were difficult to break down. So usually I'm going to have a lower tempo like this and a much shorter passing, or like all the way down. This is the default, but then I realized that we're trying to break teams down and it was kind of difficult to do that. So you kind of know that you need to switch between different phases of the game. So if the team is difficult to break down or your team is too passive, you can go ahead and push the tempo all the way up to extremely high tempo and then try to break teams down that way. In all this, you're going to be dribbling less. There won't be any running at defense, so that kind of helps your team retain possession all the time. Out of possession is another integral part of how this tactic went on to be a success. We weren't playing counter press and counter, we had counter press and hold shape instead. That way when we go on to retain possession, or when we go on to regain possession from the opposition, we kind of pass it among ourselves and make sure everybody is in their right position before we start building an attack. And that kind of helped us a lot. I've noticed in the game, it kind of helped us have a lot more control over the game. The goalkeeper has been slowing the pace down whenever he has possession of the ball, also distributing it to the centre backs whenever he's in possession. Out of possession, by default, this is supposed to be a high press and a much higher defensive line. But that's very, very risky. In fact, you can start out this way, and in most games I've started out this way, especially if I'm playing against a team that likes to play out of defense. and I know that they don't have that much composure, I can go with the high press and a much higher defensive line. But against the top teams that know how to play out from the back, I kind of adjusted playing with the high defensive line and a mid block. Yeah, a mid block. And when I'm playing with the mid block, I have more often trigger press selected. When I'm playing with the high press, with the much higher defensive line, we have an extremely much more often trigger press. That kind of helps us win possession as early as possible and rush those teams that are not very comfortable on the ball in their own defense, rush them to make errors, and then we can go on to win possession from there, recycle it amongst ourselves, and then build an attack. The team is also stepping up a lot more to try and compress the field, play in the opposition territory, and force them to lose possession. Now, set piece wise, there is a set piece routine for this tactic, but it's not the kind of routine that you think where you're going to just plug it in and then load routine. It's not really like that. I'm going to show you what I do for set pieces. What I do is to go into the data hub. I have a game against Leyton Orient coming up next. From when I recorded this video, you can assume that my season is not yet over. So I go into the opposition next overview, or the overview for the next team that we're playing against, and then you can take a sneak peek into the set pieces here. You can see that when the team is attacking, Leyton Orient prefer to in-swing deliveries to the far post. Taking note of that, I can go into my set pieces. Since they like to deliver the ball into the far post, go into set pieces, go into my defend, and then make sure that most of my players are set to the far post. I have one player here on player mark, but I'm going to change him to, okay, I can't really assign him to the far post anymore because I have most of my players are defending the far post. One player here is marking the far post. I have another player at far post center. Anything close to far post, just to make sure that wherever they're delivering that ball to, I have a defensive presence in there. I do the same thing for attack. You can go over to the set pieces for the opposition and then see that Leyton Orient prefer to mark and mark players directly on the defense, and then they prefer covering both posts. With both posts, it's quite tricky. If we're covering the far post, I would know that I'm going to cross my corners to the near post. But if they're covering the near post, I'm going to cross my corner to the far post. But now they are covering both posts. So what I like to do, instead of going for far post or near post, I do go for center or mixed. Go for center and then ask most of my players, instead of going to the far post, they can just go forward and then be random in their positioning. And that way it's more difficult for you to defend against them. Have the corner taker cross the ball to the center, and then you have a better chance of actually scoring. That's kind of how I've been approaching my set pieces with Exeter City, and it has helped us a whole lot. You can see the schedule from when we lost our last game to Wigan. It's been all good season, even a 6-1 victory against Peterborough. And this was crucial because if we look at the routine, Peterborough actually beat us 2-1 at home before. So once we transformed everything started going well for us. Look at Bolton Wanderers, that we went on to beat Bolton Wanderers 1-0. We've played Bolton before, and then we didn't actually win Bolton. And then you're going to look at another game against Derby County. We lost to Derby County 1-0, and then in the return game, we beat them 2-1. If you've been following the Exeter City rebuild, you'd notice that Charlton Athletic actually beat us 3-0. And in the return leg, after we fixed everything and got everything sorted, we beat Charlton Athletic 2-0. So everything is going well. We have 4 more games to the end of the season. And then looking at our team stats, we are currently in 5th place with 4 more games to go. And if we do well, if we play our cards well, we could get an automatic promotion, but I don't want to jinx it. Looking at the most goals, we do have 74, and Reading already has 79. We were doing quite badly before. So once we turned everything around, we're now in the top places. We're now in the conversation to be the team that has the best or the highest amount of goals, which means we've kind of transformed our season. And the best pass completion, we're up in there at 90. So our Tiki-Taka extreme possession is really, really working for us. Fewest conceded, we're in with 49 goals. We have one of the best clean sheet records in the league, 15 clean sheets, and then Bolton, that has the best, has 17. So we're 2 more off Bolton. Is that good, the tactic? So you can try it out with your team. Let me know how it works out for you. And of course, I'm going to attach a link in the description so you can download the tactic. I'm going to pack like 3 or 4 versions of the tactic that I've used, so you can see how they all work, and then you can test it out with your team, regardless of the team that you're managing, and then let me know how it works out for you. Thanks for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Enjoy your football manager.